In this video, I'll be showing you how to do Intarsia cabling. This is where one or more of the cables is actually in a different color than the rest of the background. This is a really fun thing to do, and you can create all kinds of interesting color patterns and variations in your cabled garments this way. Working Intarsia and cables at the same time is a bit daunting because it does slow you down, but it adds kind of a different sort of look to your cables. And in this way, you can bring attention to a motif that maybe would get lost otherwise. You could have one of the particular strands of a braided cable, for instance, be a different color, and you can see the myriad ways in which it weaves in and out of your design. You can choose to do one color for each of the strands of the cable, so you can have different colors for each one. You could have yellow, blue, and orange if you wanted, and have them weave in and out. And if you're familiar with the way you would work Intarsia, this is pretty much the same thing. The only difference is with the cables, because the row of stitching is moving relative to the background, you don't really need to have separate balls of color for each section of background. And also because it's a very small amount of stitches, it's only 3, you actually would just pass the working yarns over each other, kind of weaving them along and carrying them behind as you work. So in that way, you can kind of see here how they're just carried up and carried across in the back. So you can do these cables, since they're so small. I just have a tiny little amount of yarn here. You can use little scraps of yarn and actually get some good mileage out of it. So I'm going to do this cable, which is actually right here, where you bring the main color cable on top of, over top of the Intarsia cable here. So the Intarsia cable is going to go on the cable needle and be held in back. And then with the main color yarn, make sure that's in front, I knit these. And you can either knit off the cable needle or slip them back to your working needle. Now before you just go ahead and knit that, you want to make sure that you're bringing up the Intarsia strand from underneath the other yarn. So in this case the green yarn will be over top. The yellow yarn will be underneath that. And then when you change the colors again after this, it's the same thing, where the next color you use comes from underneath. So they effectively get wrapped around each other. So you just knit the other colored cable, and then again bring this from underneath. Now in the next row, basically what happens is when you bring the yellow from underneath, that's when you get a twist in them, just like that. So that way you don't end up with that funny problem of having essentially a separate section of knitting sort of floating around on top, because that you can definitely get that with any bit of Intarsia if the colors aren't wrapped around each other. And in this case, because you're not actually using separate balls of yarn, because everything moves, doing it that way, you can actually kind of see how it wraps around the back here just by wrapping them around each other. It creates sort of a chain link that keeps the Intarsia cable part of the main body of your knitting. So this one just has to move over a little bit. And if you continue in that way, essentially you can move that bit of, in this case yellow cabling, anywhere you want, and it's not going to create any sort of problems. As long as everything is wound around each other properly, you're not going to see any gapping, you're not going to see anything looking like it wants to come loose, which is really nice because it's a very solid piece of knitting. You don't have to worry about it looking strange. It's absolutely a part of everything. And unlike other Intarsia, you know, since you are just using one color here, one color for the background in this case, you're not going to have all those ends to weave in. And even though this is moving relative to the background, it's just one column of stitches. It's not actually, you know, the stitches, the motif creating a shape. This is actually just one column of stitches being moved. So you don't have those interesting offshoots that you might have in Intarsia that create gaps and things like that. So Intarsia cabling, again, it takes a little bit longer because, you know, you do have to remember to wrap your yarns and everything, both on the front and the back. Every single row you want to wrap the next color that you're going to use underneath the color that you just did. It's just a really cool way to add some interest to something, especially if you're doing, you know, a plain colored sweater or something like that. I think, oh man, I don't want to have to sit there and look at just plain white cable over and over again. You need to put a shot of a different color in there and it'll actually be really excited to get to that point every time. See here on the back, yellow is the next color, bringing it underneath the green that was just used. You work across. Now I'm going to use green, bring it underneath the yellow that was just used. And every single row you do that and it will just bind together seamlessly and you won't have to worry about anything. So to add a little bit of fun color in your cable knitting, take any chart you want, and this is our printer's approximation of highlighter yellow, but this is basically how you would show that this is the color that, you know, this is the cable that I want to make a different color. So I'm just going to scribble it in a different color. You can obviously see where the cables are crossing, which color goes where, everything like that. So it's really easy to take any existing cable pattern that you have, turn it into an Intarsia cable. You work it like this, and you get some really, really neat results.